The sun hung low over the rooftops of Jerusalem, casting long shadows on the bustling marketplace. Merchants called out their wares. Children darted through the narrow alleys, and Roman soldiers stood like stone sentinels, their presence a constant reminder of the city's occupation. Beneath the vibrant life, however, the air was heavy with tension. Whispers of rebellion and fear seeped into every corner of the city. Ishmael adjusted the strap of the leather satchel slung over his shoulder, weaving his way through the crowd. He wasn't like most of the people around him. To the average passerby, he looked like a simple scribe, a young man with ink-stained fingers and a thoughtful expression. But inside, Ishmael was a storm. The rituals of his ancestors no longer stirred his soul, and the answers the priests offered left his mind restless. Today, his task was mundane, delivering an account of tax records to a Roman official. Yet, as he walked past the towering walls of the temple, he felt a pang of discontent. The temple, once a beacon of his people's faith, now seemed more like a monument to power and control. Even the holy sanctuary couldn't escape the reach of Rome's influence. Ishmael. The voice snapped him out of his thoughts. He turned to see Ezra, a family friend and elder of the community. "You're lost in your head again. It's not safe to wander with your thoughts here." "I'm fine, Ezra," Ishmael replied with a faint smile. "Just distracted." Ezra's gaze was piercing. "You should be careful. These are dangerous times. The Romans see everything, and they're always watching for unrest." As Ezra walked away, Ishmael resumed his path, but the unease lingered. The streets narrowed as he approached the Roman garrison. Here, the air was stifling, and the soldiers' gazes followed him like predators sizing up prey. He quickened his steps, eager to complete his errand and return home. By evening, the city had transformed. The marketplace was quiet, and the streets were bathed in the dim glow of oil lamps. Ishmael made his way to the outer district, where the houses were smaller and the people poorer. That's when he saw her for the first time. She stood at the edge of the square, her presence magnetic. Her robes were a deep crimson, shimmering faintly in the torchlight, and a golden chalice hung from her hand. She was beautiful, but her beauty was unsettling, almost otherworldly. Around her, the people knelt, their faces filled with awe and terror. Ishmael stopped, unable to look away. The woman raised her chalice, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Her lips parted, but her words were lost in the stillness that gripped Ishmael's mind. All he could feel was the weight of her gaze as it swept over the crowd and landed on him. Then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone. The square was empty, the people dispersed, as if the moment had never happened. Ishmael stood frozen, his heart pounding. He didn't know who she was, but he knew one thing for certain: his life would never be the same. The encounter in the square lingered in Ishmael's mind like a shadow that refused to fade. By morning, the city was alive again, bustling as if nothing extraordinary had happened the night before. But for Ishmael, the memory of the woman in crimson haunted his thoughts. Who was she? And why did her gaze feel as though it had pierced through his very soul? He sought answers, but the familiar routines of his life provided none. As the hours passed, his unease grew into a restless energy that compelled him to leave the confines of his home. Driven by an inexplicable pull, he wandered through the winding streets, heading toward the southern edge of the city. It was there, amidst the ruins of an old synagogue, that he found her. The woman stood with her back to him, her figure draped in a plain cloak that belied the regal presence she had exuded the night before. She was speaking softly to another figure, a woman with long, dark hair and a demeanor that exuded quiet strength. As Ishmael approached, the stranger turned, her sharp eyes locking onto his. "You followed," she said, her voice steady but not unkind. Ishmael hesitated. I saw you last night," he stammered. "In the square. Who are you? What was that?" The cloaked woman turned to face him fully, her features illuminated in the morning light. She was striking, but there was a weight to her presence, a gravity that seemed to bend the air around her. "Her name is Leora," the stranger interjected. And you would do well to tread carefully, scribe. Leora's lips curved into a faint smile. No need to frighten him, Miriam. He's already burdened by more questions than answers. Her gaze softened as it met Ishmael's. You seek understanding, don't you? Ishmael nodded, feeling an inexplicable urge to trust her. I can't stop thinking about what I saw. The woman. The people kneeling. It felt wrong. But I don't understand why. That's because you're seeing with only half your eyes, Leora said enigmatically. The world you know is a veil, Ishmael. Beyond it lies the truth. A truth that few are willing to seek, and even fewer are brave enough to accept. Miriam stepped forward, her expression serious. What you saw was a glimpse of Babylon, the great deceiver. She is not a woman, but an idea, a force that enslaves the soul and blinds the heart. She is power, wealth, indulgence, and corruption incarnate. The words struck Ishmael like a blow. Babylon, he echoed, his mind racing. But Babylon fell centuries ago. Not Babylon as a place, Leora corrected gently. Babylon as a spirit. It lives on in every empire that oppresses, every system that demands worship at the altar of the material world. For hours, they spoke. Leora and Miriam told him of their journey, of the secret gatherings of those who sought the knows, the hidden knowledge that could free the soul from the shackles of the world. They spoke of the demiurge, the false god who created the material realm and held humanity in bondage through fear and ignorance. Ishmael listened, his skepticism wrestling with the strange resonance of their words. It was as though they were giving voice to the nameless void he had always felt within himself. Why are you telling me this? He asked finally. Because you were meant to hear it, Leora said simply. The vision you saw was not a coincidence. Babylon revealed herself to you because she knows you are a threat. And if you do not find your strength, she will destroy you. The weight of her words settled on him like a heavy cloak. Ishmael felt both fear and a flicker of something deeper, hope. For the first time, he felt that his restless soul might have a purpose. What must I do? He asked. Miriam and Leora exchanged a glance. Come with us, Leora said. But be warned. Once you step onto this path, there is no turning back. Night fell over Jerusalem as Ishmael followed them through the labyrinthine streets. They descended into the depths of an abandoned cistern, where a small group of men and women sat in a circle, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of an oil lamp. These were the seekers, those who had rejected the false promises of the world and devoted themselves to uncovering the truth. Leora stepped forward, addressing the group. We have a new seeker among us. His journey is just beginning, but his heart is strong. The group welcomed Ishmael with solemn nods. As he sat among them, he felt an unfamiliar sense of belonging. For the first time, the questions that had haunted him didn't feel like a curse. They felt like a calling. But in the shadows, danger stirred. The whispers of dissent and rebellion had not gone unnoticed, and the Roman authorities were closing in. Unbeknownst to Ishmael, his journey toward the light would soon plunge him into the heart of darkness. The air in the hidden gathering was thick, with an almost electric tension. Ishmael sat cross-legged among the seekers, his gaze fixed on the dim light of the central lamp as Leora began to speak. Her words flowed like a river, weaving a narrative that unraveled the very fabric of Ishmael's understanding of the world. Babylon, she said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency, is not merely the oppressor of nations, but the shaper of hearts. She tempts with wealth, ensnares with power, and blinds with promises of indulgence. Her reign is a spiritual empire, one that rules not by force alone, but through seduction. Ishmael felt a shiver run through him. The image of the woman in crimson returned to his mind. The way her presence had both awed and repelled him. How do we fight something like that? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We start by understanding her, Miriam replied, her tone firm. The Scarlet woman, as you saw her, is a manifestation of the world's corruption. She thrives wherever there is greed, exploitation, and the worship of self over the divine spark within. The more humanity succumbs to her allure, the stronger she becomes. Leora leaned forward, her piercing gaze meeting Ishmael's. You felt it, haven't you? The emptiness that no ritual or law could fill. That emptiness is the key, is the crack in the prison walls, the place where the light of the true God can shine through. As the hours stretched into the night, the group delved deeper into the mysteries of the Gnosis. Ishmael learned of the dualistic nature of existence, the battle between the material and the spiritual, between the demiurge and the unknowable one. The teachings resonated with him on a level he couldn't explain, as though they were awakening something that had always been there, buried beneath layers of fear and doubt. But their gathering was not as secret as they believed. Outside the cistern, shadows moved. Roman soldiers, tipped off by informants, crept through the silent streets. Among them was Caius Marcellus, a centurion known for his ruthlessness and his hatred of anything that threatened Rome's iron grip. To him, the Seekers were more than a nuisance. They were a cancer that needed to be excised. Within the cistern, the Seekers remained unaware of the danger closing in. They had just begun a ritual of meditation, a practice meant to silence the mind and attune the soul to the higher realms. Ishmael closed his eyes, focusing on his breath as Leora's voice guided them. Let go of illusions, she said. Feel the false weights of the world fall away. Beyond the chaos of the mind lies the stillness of truth. Ishmael felt a flicker of that stillness, a momentary glimpse of something vast and luminous. But before he could grasp it, the sound of heavy boots shattered the silence. The soldiers burst into the cistern, their torches casting wild shadows on the walls. Chaos erupted as the Seekers scrambled to their feet. Ishmael's heart pounded as he instinctively reached for Leora, who pulled him toward a narrow tunnel at the back of the chamber. This way, she urged, her voice sharp but steady. Miriam and a few others followed, while the rest of the group attempted to hold off the soldiers. Ishmael glanced back, his stomach twisting at the sight of the centurion driving his sword through a man who had tried to shield the others. Keep moving, Miriam shouted, snapping Ishmael back to the present. He ducked into the tunnel, his breaths ragged as the walls closed in around him. The tunnel emerged into the outskirts of the city, where the night air was cool and bracing. Leora led them to a grove of olive trees, where they stopped to catch their breath. They know about us now, Miriam said grimly. We won't be safe in Jerusalem anymore. Leora nodded, her expression unreadable. Then we leave. There are others beyond this city, seekers who need to hear the truth. Babylon's reach is vast, but so is the light. What about the others? Ishmael asked, his voice tinged with guilt. We left them behind. Leora placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch both firm and comforting. Their sacrifice won't be in vain. They knew the risks, Ishmael. And now, so do you. For the first time, Ishmael felt the full weight of the path he had chosen. There was no going back, not to the safety of his old life, nor to the ignorance that had shielded him from the world's deeper truths. He was a fugitive now, hunted by both Rome and the unseen forces of Babylon. But he was also something else, a seeker, part of a rebellion that transcended the physical and reached into the very heart of existence. As the group began their journey into the wilderness, Ishmael's mind raced with questions. What lay ahead? How could they possibly stand against a force as vast and insidious as Babylon? And what role was he meant to play in this unfolding struggle? One thing was certain. The battle had only just begun. The days that followed were a blur of flight and secrecy. Ishmael and the small group of seekers moved under the cover of darkness, never staying in one place for too long. The weight of their mission hung heavy on them all, but it was especially so for Ishmael. Every step he took felt as though he was moving further from everything he had once known, and closer to something far more dangerous, yet infinitely more real. Leora led them westward, away from Jerusalem, and toward the heart of the wilderness. Her determination was palpable, her step sure, even though their food was running low and their water supplies had dwindled. Miriam was quiet but steady, her fierce loyalty to Leora unwavering. It was clear to Ishmael that the two women were more than mere companions in this journey. They were leaders, guides, and protectors. As they ventured deeper into the desert, Ishmael's mind was constantly turning over the teachings he had learned. Babylon, the false empire, was not just an external force, but a spiritual prison that ensnared the hearts and minds of all who submitted to its temptations. The Gnosis, the hidden knowledge that Leora and Miriam spoke of, was the key to liberation. It was the light that could free the soul from the bondage of the material world. But even as he pondered these truths, a gnawing sense of unease began to grow within him. He had seen the power of Babylon's reach in Jerusalem. He had witnessed its corruption in the form of Roman soldiers who had attacked their gathering. But what about its true force? What if the power of Babylon was not just the soldiers or the temples of gold? It was something far more insidious, something that had infiltrated every aspect of their world, and possibly even the very hearts of those who thought they were free. His thoughts were interrupted by a distant sound, a low rumble that grew louder with each passing moment. Ishmael tensed, his senses sharpening. Miriam's hand moved instinctively to the hilt of her dagger, while Leora's eyes narrowed in concentration. "Keep moving," she whispered urgently. "We need to reach the oasis before they catch up." Ishmael's heart skipped a beat. "Who?" he asked, but Leora did not answer. She only quickened her pace, signaling the others to do the same. They reached the oasis just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the dry landscape. The water was clear and refreshing, and for a moment, the travelers allowed themselves to drink deeply, filling their stomachs and replenishing their energy. But even here, in this quiet haven, the threat of discovery loomed over them. "It's only a matter of time before they find us," Miriam muttered, her voice tight with anxiety. "We're too exposed here." Leora nodded. "We can't stay long. We need to meet with the others. There's a hidden settlement, a place where the seekers gather. It's beyond the reach of Babylon's eyes." Ishmael felt a flicker of hope. "Others? More like us?" "Yes," Leora replied. "But they are in hiding, as we are. The forces that seek to destroy us are vast. It's not just Rome. It's everything Babylon represents. The material world, the false gods, the chains of human desire. The city of shadows reaches farther than we ever imagined." That night, as they sat around a small fire, Leora spoke of their mission more openly. She told Ishmael of the ancient prophecy, one that had been passed down among the seekers for generations. It spoke of the last light, a figure who would arise to challenge Babylon and bring about the fall of the empire of shadows. Ishmael was struck by the gravity of her words. "Do you believe in this prophecy?" he asked. Leora's expression softened. "I do. It is not just a story, Ishmael. It is the story. It is the culmination of all the knowledge we seek. The last light is the one who will shatter the chains and expose the truth to the world. But to find him, or her, we must first overcome the trials set before us." "The trials?" Ishmael echoed, confusion creeping into his voice. Miriam spoke this time, her eyes dark and weary. "There are forces at work that we can't yet comprehend, powers that shape the world from the shadows. We must find the path to the last light, but it will not be easy. Babylon will do everything in its power to stop us." "And what does this last light represent?" Ishmael pressed, the mystery gnawing at him. "It represents the ultimate truth," Leora said. "It is the realization that there is no separation between the material world and the divine, that the soul is eternal, and that only through knowledge and awakening can we escape the grasp of the demiurge, the false god who traps us in the cycle of death and rebirth." Ishmael sat in silence, absorbing her words. It was almost too much to bear. To think that everything he had known, his life, his work, his purpose, was part of a larger illusion was a staggering revelation. The fire crackled in the still night air, and Ishmael couldn't help but wonder what path lay ahead. Could he truly awaken to this gnosis? Could he find the courage to face Babylon and its endless temptations? And what of the last light? Was he part of this prophecy, or merely a pawn in a game far greater than he could understand? Suddenly, a cry pierced the air, one that sent a chill down Ishmael's spine. A voice in the distance, calling out in a desperate plea. Without a word, Leora leapt to her feet, her eyes scanning the dark horizon. "It's them," she whispered. "They've found us." The travelers quickly extinguished the fire and gathered their things, the quiet urgency of the moment consuming them. But in the stillness of the desert night, they were already too late. The shadows had arrived. The air was thick with tension as the group moved swiftly through the desert, the sounds of pursuit growing nearer. Ishmael's mind raced. The cry that had shattered the quiet oasis echoed in his ears, and he felt a cold knot form in his stomach. It wasn't just the Romans that sought them. It was something worse. Something that had been silently infiltrating their ranks for days. Leora's face was taut, her jaw set in a grim line. "They're too close. We need to take a different route," she muttered, her eyes scanning the horizon. Miriam, ever vigilant, was already scouting ahead. She was the first to spot the distant figures moving toward them, but there was something off about them. They didn't move like Roman soldiers, and they didn't speak in the language of the empire. Instead, there was a whisper of something darker in their footsteps, a subtle shift in the air that made Ishmael's skin crawl. "They're not Roman," Miriam said, her voice tight with unease. "But they're no less dangerous." "Who are they?" Ishmael asked, his voice barely audible as the group continued moving. Leora's eyes hardened. "They're part of the hidden hand, the ones who've infiltrated the Seekers. They're disciples of Babylon in disguise. Their mission is not just to find us, but to destroy the light we carry." A chill swept through Ishmael as the implications of her words sank in. "Betrayers?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "Among us?" "Yes," Leora said sharply, her voice taking on a mournful tone. "There are always those who will sell the truth for the sake of power, for the promise of favor from Babylon. We've always known the risk, but the betrayal cuts deeper when it comes from within." The desert seemed to stretch endlessly in front of them, and the shadows of their pursuers grew ever closer. But it wasn't just the physical distance that separated Ishmael from them. It was the growing realization that everything he thought he knew about their mission was beginning to unravel. As they moved further into the desert, the group paused in a small hollow beneath a cliffside. Leora's eyes scanned the surroundings, her every movement deliberate as she spoke. "There's no time to waste. We have to confront this threat before it destroys us from within," she said. Ishmael felt his heart race. "What do we do now?" Leora locked eyes with him, her expression grim but resolute. "We prepare ourselves. We know that Babylon's influence is deep, but its true power lies not in its armies or its riches. It lies in its ability to plant seeds of doubt and division." Miriam spoke then, her voice heavy with the weight of experience. "The betrayers are already among us. They're sowing discord, turning some of the Seekers against one another. We cannot let them break our unity." Ishmael's mind swirled with conflicting emotions. He had come to believe in their cause, to trust in the path they were on, but now, the very foundation of their mission seemed to be crumbling. Was this how Babylon had always worked? Through division, through the subtle planting of lies that made truth seem like madness? Suddenly, the stillness of the desert night was pierced by a faint, deliberate sound, a footstep in the sand. Ishmael's heart pounded as he turned to see a shadow moving toward them from behind a cluster of rocks. Without a word, Leora reached for her dagger, signaling the group to prepare. Miriam's hand was already on her weapon, her eyes sharp and focused. The figure that emerged from the darkness was cloaked in black, its features hidden beneath a hood. But Ishmael could feel the weight of its gaze, cold and calculating. It was the last thing he had expected to see. "Ishmael," the figure said, its voice smooth, almost comforting. "I've been waiting for you." His breath caught in his throat. He recognized the voice. It was Samuel, the very Seeker who had first introduced him to Leora's group. Samuel. Ishmael whispered, his voice full of disbelief. Leora's expression turned to stone. I knew it, she murmured. You've been compromised. Samuel's smile was like a snake's, a slow, chilling grin that made Ishmael's blood run cold. You still don't understand, do you? He said, stepping closer into the dim light. I'm not your enemy. I'm your salvation. You've been deceived, Ishmael. This so-called light you're chasing, it's nothing but a mirage. Babylon's true power lies not in power over the body, but power over the mind. The truth you seek is a lie, and I'm here to show you. Ishmael took an instinctive step back, his heart racing. I've seen it all, Samuel interrupted, his voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality. I've seen the future, Ishmael. Babylon will not fall. It is the true order of the universe. You can fight it all you want, but you'll never defeat it. It's woven into the very fabric of existence. Ishmael's mind spun. Samuel, the very person who had guided him to this mission, was now speaking as though he had betrayed everything they stood for. The gnosis, the light, all of it was now tainted by the words of a traitor who had been hiding in their midst. I don't believe you, Ishmael said, his voice firm but uncertain. This isn't the truth. I've seen the power of the light, and I know Babylon can be overcome. Samuel laughed, a low, almost cruel sound that echoed through the silent desert. You're a fool, Ishmael. You think you can fight an empire that is everywhere? You think you can win with your misguided ideals and empty rituals? No. This is how it always ends. Those who dare to challenge Babylon fall into madness. Ishmael's gaze flickered to Leora, who stood motionless, her face a mask of cold fury. He could feel the weight of the moment press upon him. Samuel's betrayal was not just an attack on their mission. It was a challenge to everything Ishmael had come to believe about the world. I won't let you destroy us, Leora said, her voice low and threatening. Samuel's grin widened. You're too late. And with that, the figure stepped back into the shadows, disappearing as silently as he had come. As the group gathered their thoughts, the true weight of the betrayal began to settle in. Samuel had not just abandoned them. He had turned their very mission into a weapon against them. Babylon's reach had proven to be even more insidious than they had imagined. The question now was, how far would it go to crush their rebellion? And most importantly, how much of it had already infected their hearts? The night was quiet, but the stillness felt like a pressure pressing down on Ishmael's chest. He could still hear Samuel's voice echoing in his mind, the sharp edges of his words cutting through the air like daggers. Babylon was everywhere, Samuel had said. Its power was insidious, corrupting everything in its path, even the seekers. They had thought they were hidden, safe in their pursuit of truth, but now it was clear. They were surrounded, and the betrayer was already among them. Samuel had been a first, but who else? Who else had been swayed by the seductive promises of Babylon? Ishmael felt the heavy weight of doubt creep into his mind. For the first time since joining this movement, he questioned the very foundation of their cause. Was it truly the light they were chasing? Or was it an illusion, a fleeting spark in the darkness, destined to be swallowed whole? Leora's voice broke the silence, sharp and commanding. We need to move, now. Her words snapped Ishmael out of his spiraling thoughts. He looked up, his eyes locking with hers. She was unshaken, her face set with a determination that he envied. Despite everything, she was still focused, still fighting. But Ishmael knew that even the strongest leaders could falter in the face of treachery. We cannot allow this betrayal to define us, Leora continued, her gaze hardening as she scanned the surroundings. We need to find the last light. Only the truth can save us now. If we don't, we will fall, just like all those who came before us. The last light, Ishmael repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. But how do we find it? Samuel's words, they were so convincing. He made me question everything. Miriam stepped forward, her eyes filled with both anger and fear. Samuel is a fool and a traitor. He thinks he can save himself by serving Babylon, but he's only serving his own pride. The last light is real, Ishmael. The truth he speaks is falsehood, wrapped in lies. Ishmael nodded slowly, though the seed of doubt Samuel had planted was not so easily erased. He had seen the power of Babylon's influence firsthand, the way it could twist people's hearts, turning even the most faithful into tools of destruction. Was it possible that he, too, could fall prey to its allure? Leora set her jaw, her voice hard with conviction. We must keep moving. The path is clear. The last light awaits, but it is not without cost. There are trials ahead, but they are the only way forward. We cannot afford to lose sight of the truth. They began to move again, the weight of their mission pressing heavily on them. The desert stretched endlessly before them, the cold night air sharp against their skin. Every step was another moment closer to their destination. But what would they find when they arrived? Was the last light a savior or another illusion? As they walked, Leora spoke softly, almost as if to herself. We are not the first to seek the truth. There have been others before us, those who dared to challenge Babylon's hold. They, too, sought the last light, and some of them found it, and were forever changed. Ishmael's curiosity piqued. What happened to them? They died, Miriam answered grimly. Most of them, anyway, but not before they awakened to the Gnosis. They saw the truth for what it was, and they knew that Babylon's reign could be ended. Leora's gaze turned distant, her eyes fixed on the horizon as she spoke of the past. But the price was steep. The truth is not something that comes easily. The last light is not a being, it is an understanding. It is the realization that the material world is an illusion, that the soul is eternal, and that only through knowledge can we escape the chains of Babylon. Ishmael thought on her words, his mind turning over what he had learned. The concept of Gnosis was no longer just an abstract idea. It was something personal, something he was meant to find within himself. But could he really awaken to this truth? Could he truly let go of the world he had known, the life he had led? And how do we find this last light? Ishmael asked, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and skepticism. Leora turned her gaze to him, her eyes steady and full of purpose. We go to the ruins. There, we will find the relics of those who have come before us. The wisdom they left behind is a map, a guide to awakening. But the path is not easy. Many will try to stop us. Some will even pretend to help us. But we must remain vigilant. Only by staying true to our purpose can we reach the last light. The thought of entering the ruins sent a shiver through Ishmael's spine. The ruins were said to be a place of great danger, a tomb where the lost and forgotten lay in eternal silence. It was a place of great power, but also of great risk. Many had entered the ruins, but few had returned. But Ishmael knew there was no other choice. If the last light was real, if the truth they sought could truly bring an end to Babylon's grip, then this was the only way forward. They continued their journey through the desert, the landscape growing more desolate with each step. The oppressive silence of the wilderness was broken only by the soft crunch of their footsteps in the sand. Hours passed, and with each one, the group grew more weary. But Leora's resolve never wavered. She pushed them onward, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon where the ruins were said to lie. It was late in the evening when they finally saw it, an ancient structure rising out of the sand, half buried by time and neglect. The ruins were more magnificent than Ishmael had imagined, carved stones, crumbling pillars, and twisted arches that seemed to stretch toward the sky like the bones of some long-dead giant. The air around it was thick with a strange energy, the atmosphere heavy with the weight of centuries. This is it, Leora said, her voice low. The place where the truth awaits. Ishmael swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. The ruins loomed before them, a testament to the power and knowledge of those who had come before. But even as he looked at the broken stones, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. The shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, and the desert wind whispered in his ears like a warning. We are not safe here, Miriam said quietly, her eyes darting around. Babylon's eyes are everywhere. The shadows are watching us. Leora nodded. We must be quick. The knowledge within these ruins is our only hope. As they approached the entrance, a sudden gust of wind blew through the narrow passage, carrying with it a faint, chilling laugh. It was a sound that sent a cold shiver down Ishmael's spine. He looked around, but the source of the laugh was nowhere to be seen. Stay close, Leora said, her voice tight with urgency. And do not trust anything you hear. The door to the ruins creaked open, revealing an eerie darkness beyond. The time for hesitation was over. They had come this far, and there was no turning back. The darkness of the ruins enveloped them as they stepped inside, the air thick and heavy with the scent of age-old dust. The faint flicker of their torches illuminated the walls, revealing intricate carvings, symbols and images that seemed to pulse with an ancient power. It was as if the stones themselves whispered secrets of a time long past, a time when the light of Gnosis had once shone brightly. Ishmael's heart raced, his senses heightened in the eerie silence. The deeper they ventured into the ruins, the more he felt the weight of history pressing in on him, like the very earth was alive, watching, judging. The air grew colder with each step, as if the shadows were closing in around them. Leora led the way, her movements sure and unwavering. She had come here before. She knew the path. But for Ishmael, every turn, every step felt like a descent into the unknown. It was more than just a physical journey. It was a journey of the mind, of the soul. The last light, the truth they sought, was not just a place. It was a transformation. And Ishmael could feel the tension in the air, as if the ruins themselves were testing their worth. This place, Miriam whispered, her voice tense. It's alive. Leora nodded, her eyes scanning the narrow passage ahead. Yes, the ruins are more than just stone and earth. They are a repository of knowledge, of power. But they also carry the weight of the past, the sins, the betrayals, the fallen. Those who came before us, they too sought the truth, and many of them failed. Ishmael shivered, though the cold wasn't the only thing that made his skin crawl. It was the weight of the unseen eyes, the echoes of those who had come to the ruins seeking answers, only to be consumed by the very darkness they hoped to escape. Do you think we're ready? Ishmael asked, his voice barely audible, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile silence around them. Leora glanced at him, her gaze steady but somber. None of us are truly ready. The last light is not a gift. It is a challenge, a trial that will strip us of everything we know, everything we hold dear. To see the truth is to lose oneself. To awaken to the Gnosis is to walk away from everything that ties us to this world. Miriam's voice, sharp and fierce, cut through the quiet. And yet we must. There is no choice, Ishmael. The world outside is falling apart, and only by embracing the truth can we stop the destruction. Babylon is everywhere, corrupting everything. But we can stop it, if we can find the light. As they moved deeper into the heart of the ruins, the walls grew closer together, the passage narrowing until they were almost walking in single file. The air was thick now, heavy with a strange tension, and Ishmael couldn't help but feel that someone, was waiting for them. A presence, dark and powerful, that seemed to whisper to him from the shadows. They reached a large chamber, its ceiling high and arched. In the center stood a stone altar, ancient and worn, but still emanating an otherworldly energy. The altar was surrounded by broken statues, remnants of long-forgotten gods, their features weathered by time. It was here, Leora believed, that the secrets they sought were hidden. This is it, she said, her voice filled with awe and reverence. The heart of the ruins. The last light is close. Ishmael's breath caught in his throat as he approached the altar. The carvings on the walls around it seemed to shift in the flickering torchlight, the symbols changing before his eyes. He could see figures, beings who were neither human nor divine, their forms blurred, as though they existed beyond the limits of the material world. They beckoned him, their eyes gleaming with an ancient knowledge that both frightened and intrigued him. "What are they?" Ishmael asked, his voice trembling. "They are the Watchers," Leora replied, "the beings who guard the truth. They were once human, but they transcended the physical world. Now they exist only to guide those who seek the Gnosis, to test them." Miriam stepped closer to the altar, her eyes burning with intensity. "To find the last light, we must offer something in return. The truth is not free. It requires sacrifice. Each seeker must give up something precious." Ishmael's heart pounded in his chest as he approached the altar, his mind racing with questions. What would he have to sacrifice? What was he willing to lose in the pursuit of truth? He had already given up so much, his family, his life, his very sense of self. But was that enough? He looked at the altar once more, the weight of the decision pressing on him. The figures on the walls seemed to watch him with knowing eyes, their silent judgment hanging over him like a dark cloud. Was he ready for the truth? Was he ready to see the world for what it truly was? To break free from the illusion of Babylon's power? And then, as if answering his unspoken question, the air around him grew heavy. A low hum filled the chamber, a sound that vibrated in his chest, in his bones. The altar shifted, the stone creaking as if alive, and in that moment, Ishmael knew that the last light had begun to reveal itself. "Prepare yourself," Leora whispered, her voice steady but filled with a deep, primal fear. "The journey is about to begin." The chamber trembled beneath their feet, the low hum of the altar growing louder, resonating deep in Ishmael's chest. His mind spun with thoughts of the truth he was about to uncover, and yet, deep down, a part of him hesitated. The figures on the walls, with their glowing eyes, seemed to stir, their forms shifting as though they were aware of his every thought. Their silent gaze felt like a piercing weight, assessing him, judging him. Leora stepped forward, her face a mixture of determination and fear. "We are not alone in this place, Ishmael. The trial has begun. The truth will not be given lightly." Ishmael swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath, but the oppressive atmosphere of the chamber made it almost impossible. The air felt thicker, charged with something ancient and powerful. He turned to Leora, searching her eyes for reassurance, but all he saw was the same uncertainty reflected back at him. "This trial," Ishmael began, his voice shaky. "What is it? What must we do?" Miriam's voice was steady, her tone filled with conviction. "It is not what we must do, but what we must face. The truth we seek is not a simple answer. It is a revelation, a reckoning. The last light will show us the world as it truly is, but only if we are willing to confront the darkness within ourselves." As if to underline her words, the altar shifted once more, and the chamber's walls seemed to pulse, the symbols glowing brighter, more intense. The once quiet hum now vibrated through the very ground beneath them, creating a deep, resonant tone that seemed to reverberate in Ishmael's bones. "Ishmael," Leora said softly, "you must understand, the last light does not show us a single truth. It reveals many truths, all of which are difficult, painful, and transformative. You must decide now if you are ready to face what it will show you." The air around them grew cold, and Ishmael could feel an unnatural presence growing stronger, almost tangible. The whispering voices, soft like a breeze, but sharp as a knife, seemed to emerge from the very stones. They spoke in a language he could not understand, yet their meaning was clear. Were you willing to sacrifice for truth? The question echoed in his mind, reverberating through the very fibers of his being. What was he willing to give up? His life, his sense of identity, his soul. Leora stepped closer to the altar, her hand hovering just above the surface. "The last light will not accept those who are not ready," she murmured, almost to herself. "The ancient watchers will test us, and only those pure of heart will be allowed to see the full truth. The rest, those who are unwilling, will be cast out, Before Ishmael could respond, the ground beneath them cracked, and a deep chasm appeared before the altar. It stretched wide, impossibly deep, the darkness within it seemingly infinite. He could feel the pull of the abyss, an unsettling force that whispered his name, beckoning him closer. "The abyss," Leora said, her voice low, almost reverent. "It is the first trial. To cross it is to surrender to the unknown, to face the darkness of our own hearts. Only then will we be ready to receive the light." Ishmael stared at the chasm, feeling a deep, primal fear take hold of him. It was not just a physical gap. It was a representation of everything he had tried to bury within himself. His doubts, his fears, his sins. The darkness that had followed him his entire life, threatening to swallow him whole. But Miriam stepped forward with a quiet resolve, her eyes fixed on the chasm. "This is our path. We must cross it, or we will be forever lost in shadows." With that, she took the first step into the abyss. The ground beneath her feet shifted, but Miriam did not falter. Slowly, she moved forward, her body disappearing into the darkness. A moment later, she appeared on the other side, standing tall and unscathed, her expression one of quiet triumph. "Now it's your turn," she called, her voice echoing through the chasm. Ishmael's heart pounded in his chest as he approached the edge of the abyss. The darkness seemed to reach up, threatening to consume him whole. But something inside him stirred, a glimmer of courage, a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the moment he had been waiting for, the chance to confront the very essence of his fears and emerge on the other side, transformed. With a deep breath, he stepped forward. The ground beneath him gave way, and for a moment, he felt himself falling into the black void. But then, suddenly, his feet found solid ground. He looked up, and there, standing before him, was Miriam, a knowing smile on her lips. "You did it," she said softly. But Ishmael wasn't paying attention to her. His gaze was fixed on the path ahead, the next challenge that awaited him. The trial was far from over, and he knew that the darkness he had just faced was only the beginning. The air in the chamber shifted as Ishmael and Miriam stood together, their feet now on solid ground. The chasm behind them had closed, leaving no trace of the abyss that had separated them from the next phase of their trial. There was a weight in the air, something heavy and suffocating, as if the very space itself was holding its breath. Leora stood ahead of them, her face a mask of solemnity. "The abyss is only the first veil," she said, her voice low but firm. "It was designed to test your courage, your willingness to face the darkness within. But now, we must move beyond it. The next trial awaits us." Ishmael nodded, still feeling the echo of the abyss in his chest. The darkness had been all-consuming, but now that it was behind him, a strange sense of emptiness lingered. Had he truly confronted his fears? Had he truly faced the abyss within? Or had he only been allowed to cross it by the mercy of the unseen forces guiding him? "You must each look beyond what you think you know," Leora continued. "The next veil will strip away your perceptions, your assumptions. It is not an external force we face now, but the internal one, the ego, the false self. To progress, you must understand the illusions you've been living." Ishmael felt the weight of her words. He had thought he knew who he was, but now, after the abyss, doubts crept into his mind. Was he the man he believed himself to be? Or had the darkness only revealed parts of himself he was unwilling to acknowledge? "Step forward," Leora commanded, gesturing toward the path ahead. As Ishmael moved, he felt a shift in the atmosphere, an unnatural stillness that hung in the air like a thick fog. His senses were heightened, every movement amplified in the silence. Each footstep echoed, the sound bouncing off the ancient walls of the chamber, as if the stones themselves were alive, recording his every move. The path before them twisted, curving in ways that defied logic. The stone walls now bore intricate carvings of faces, human faces, but their eyes were hollow, their expressions twisted in anguish. As they walked deeper into the maze, Ishmael began to feel the pull of something greater than the darkness he had just faced. These were not just symbols. They were sentience, consciousness. The ruins were alive with ancient knowledge, but it was knowledge that had been corrupted, twisted by time and the weight of human sin. Leora paused before a large, looming door that appeared at the end of the narrow hallway. The door was covered in symbols and intricate patterns, symbols that mirrored the ones Ishmael had seen before, but now they pulsed with an unnatural light, a sickly green hue. "This is the second veil," Leora said. "Beyond this door lies the truth of your soul. But you must first confront the illusions that cloud your perception. Once you enter, you will see yourself, not as you want to be, but as you truly are." Ishmael's heart pounded in his chest. The door seemed to beckon him, yet a part of him recoiled. What would he see on the other side? Would he recognize himself, or would the truth shatter everything he believed about his life, his past, his purpose? With a deep breath, he stepped forward. As his hand touched the cold surface of the door, it creaked open slowly, revealing a room bathed in dim, green light. The walls were covered with mirrors, their surfaces reflecting countless versions of himself. The air was thick with the stench of incense, burning low in the corners of the room. "This is your trial," Leora's voice echoed, distant yet close. "You must look into the mirrors and face what you have hidden from yourself. Only by confronting the truths you have buried can you hope to see the last light." Ishmael stepped cautiously into the room, his eyes drawn to the mirrors. As he moved closer, the reflections grew clearer. At first, he saw his own face, worn with fatigue, eyes hollow with doubt. But as his gaze lingered, the mirrors began to shift, showing not only his physical form, but the shadows beneath the surface. Faces of people he had known flashed before him. His mother, his childhood friend, the women he had betrayed in his search for truth. Their eyes bore into him, accusing, reminding him of the weight of his past. The images blurred and warped, swirling in the reflective surfaces, until Ishmael could no longer tell where his image ended and theirs began. It was as if he were drowning in a sea of his own sins, each reflection pulling him deeper into the darkness of his soul. The more he tried to focus on one image, the more it twisted into another, each a distorted version of himself, each more monstrous than the last. "Who are you?" a voice whispered, soft and seductive, like a breath against his ear. Ishmael's heart raced. The voice came from every direction, 1,000 whispers converging into one. "Who are you really? What are you hiding from? What truths are you unwilling to face?" The question echoed in his mind, reverberating through every inch of his being. His knees buckled, and he fell to the ground, clutching his head in his hands. The weight of the voices, the faces, the accusations, everything was too much to bear. The mirror images distorted even further, their edges blurring into a suffocating darkness. In the midst of it all, a single, clear thought cut through the chaos. You must face yourself. He stood slowly, shakily, and looked into the nearest mirror. This time, the reflection was not the man he wanted to be, but the man he had become. The coward, the liar, the one who had abandoned his beliefs, seeking truth in the wrong places. He saw the fear that had guided his actions, the pride that had blinded him to the pain he caused others. And yet, through the darkness, he saw a flicker of light, a spark, faint but undeniable, a glimmer of something pure, something untouched by his failures. It was the seed of the truth, buried beneath the layers of illusion. "I see you," Ishmael whispered to the mirror, to the reflection that had once seemed so foreign to him. "I see who I am." The whispers died down, the mirror settled, and the light in the room shifted. The green hue faded, replaced by a soft, golden glow. The veil had been lifted. The golden light that filled the room was warm, gentle, as if the air itself was breathing a sigh of relief. Ishmael stood motionless before the mirrors, still absorbing the weight of what he had just faced. The room around him felt different now, no longer oppressive or suffocating. The walls, once covered in grotesque reflections, now seemed to shimmer with a quiet, serene beauty. He turned, and Miriam and Leora were standing behind him, their expressions unreadable, but filled with an understanding that only those who had traversed the same path could share. Miriam, her eyes calm and steady, spoke first. "You've done it," she said softly. "The illusion has fallen away, but the hardest part is yet to come." Ishmael nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle deep in his chest. The trial had been grueling, but he understood now that the greatest challenge had never been the abyss or the mirrors. It had always been the lies he had told himself, the masks he had worn, and the truths he had buried so deep that even he had forgotten them. "I thought I was ready," Ishmael said, his voice hoarse. "But the truth is more terrifying than I could ever have imagined." Leora stepped forward, her eyes reflecting a deep, ancient wisdom. "The truth is not meant to comfort you, Ishmael. It is meant to set you free. Only when you face it, fully and without resistance, can you understand the path ahead." They began walking together, the path before them opening up like a darkened tunnel leading toward an unknown destination. The air was thick, heavy with anticipation, but there was a sense of inevitability that now guided them. The trial was not over, only the veils had been lifted. What lay beyond was the final truth, the essence of their mission, the heart of the last light. As they walked, the walls around them began to shift once more. The golden glow faded into a deeper, richer light, one that seemed to pulse with an inner energy. At the end of the corridor, an immense doorway loomed before them. It was covered in symbols, intricate geometric patterns that seemed to change and evolve with every step they took. The symbols were not of this world, not of the world they knew. They spoke a language older than time, a language that transcended words. "Ishmael," Leora said, her voice serious. "This is it, the final trial, the last light. Beyond this door, you will face your ultimate revelation, the knowledge of all things, the truth of creation, the meaning of your existence. But know this, once you enter, there is no turning back. Once the light is revealed, you will see the universe as it truly is, not as you have believed it to be." A cold shiver ran down Ishmael's spine. The enormity of the decision hit him like a physical blow. To face the last light meant to lose everything, to lose the illusion of control, to be stripped bare before the truth of the universe itself. Could he truly bear it? Was he ready to witness what lay beyond the veil? "I'm ready," he said, though the words felt foreign on his tongue. His hands trembled, and his pulse quickened. But deep within, a fire had ignited. The journey had led him here for a reason, and he had come too far to turn back now. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, his hand reaching for the door. The symbols on its surface began to glow, their light intensifying as his fingers brushed against them. The door creaked open, its ancient hinges groaning in protest, revealing a vast, luminous space beyond. Inside, the light was blinding, a pure, radiant energy that seemed to fill the entire universe. It was not a physical light, but something beyond matter, beyond comprehension. It was the source of all things, the primal force of creation, the energy that connected every living being in the cosmos. As Ishmael stepped across the threshold, he felt himself being consumed by the light. His body, his mind, everything he had ever known seemed to dissolve into the vastness of the energy surrounding him. He no longer felt himself. He was no longer Ishmael, the wanderer, the seeker. He was the light. He was the truth. The past, the present, and the future collided in a single moment of realization. All at once, he understood. The universe was a tapestry of interconnected energies, a web of divine light and shadow. Every action, every thought, every choice was part of a greater design, a pattern beyond human comprehension. The suffering, the joy, the trials, and the triumphs were all threads in this intricate design, each one necessary to the whole. He saw the faces of all those he had encountered, Leora, Miriam, the countless others who had crossed his path. Their lives, their struggles, were part of this divine fabric. He saw the interconnectedness of all things, the dance of light and shadow, of good and evil, of life and death. And in that moment, he understood that there was no separation between them. All was one. All was connected. But with this knowledge came a crushing weight. To know the truth was to lose the illusion of control, the illusion of choice. In the face of the last light, all things were revealed as fleeting, insignificant. There was no free will, only the grand design unfolding, moment by moment. Ishmael felt the weight of this truth, and for the first time, he understood the meaning of sacrifice. He had crossed the threshold. He had faced the darkness within. He had seen the universe as it truly was, and now, there was no going back. Ishmael stood in the blinding radiance, his body seemingly dissolved into the vastness of the light, yet somehow, he was still aware. It was as though he were both everywhere and nowhere at once, suspended in a state of pure knowing, untethered to the physical world he had known. His mind, once clouded by doubt and fear, was now open, flooded with insight that transcended his understanding of time and space. But amid the overwhelming revelation, there was something else, a subtle shift, a faint vibration that echoed in the depths of his consciousness. It was not the clarity of truth that caused this stir, but the absence of something, a choice. For the first time since his journey had begun, Ishmael realized that the revelation of the last light came with an unexpected consequence, a decision. Despite the overwhelming oneness of the universe he had just witnessed, despite the knowledge that all things were connected in a divine design, there was still the presence of will, his will, the choice to embrace the light or to turn from it. As the light pulsed around him, Ishmael felt the presence of the other, a shadow, something that had been lingering at the edges of his consciousness, waiting for this very moment. It was a dark, seductive energy, one that sought to pull him away from the clarity of the light, to lure him back into the illusions of the self, the ego. It whispered to him in a voice that felt familiar, yet alien, like a distant memory of something he had once known. "You do not have to face this truth alone," the voice murmured. "The light is all-consuming, but you can hide within the shadows. You can return to the world you once knew, where you controlled your own fate. The truth is too much for any soul to bear. Embrace the shadows, and I will protect you. I will shield you from the burden of knowledge." Ishmael's heart pounded. The temptation was undeniable. To retreat into the shadows would be to return to the comforts of the familiar, the known. It would be a return to the self, the ego, the world of illusion. It would be easier, safer. But something within him, a deep, primal instinct, knew that to give in would mean abandoning the very truth he had sought for so long. The shadow's presence grew stronger, its voice more insistent. You can have everything you desire: wealth, power, love, a life untouched by the consequences of truth. All you have to do is let go of this light. You do not need to know the universe. You do not need to see the grand design. Just choose to close your eyes, to return to the world of your dreams. Ishmael stood frozen, his mind at war. The light around him shimmered, but its brightness seemed to blur as the shadow pressed against his consciousness. He felt his sense of self beginning to unravel, like the very fabric of his being was being pulled in two directions. In one hand, the promise of the light, clarity, truth, connection. In the other, the lure of the shadows, comfort, control, and the illusion of power. But then, something within him shifted. It wasn't a loud, obvious voice, but a subtle, quiet pull, like a memory surfacing in the recesses of his mind. He thought of Miriam, of Leora, of everyone he had met along this journey. They had all faced their own trials, their own revelations, but none had taken the easy path. They had embraced the light, not because it was easy, but because it was the only way forward. The light, no matter how blinding, no matter how overwhelming, was the path of truth. And truth, he realized, was the only thing that could set him free from the cycles of illusion that had haunted him for so long. "I choose the light," Ishmael said, his voice firm and resolute, though it trembled in the face of Shadow's whisper. I choose truth over comfort. I choose knowledge over ignorance. I choose to face what is real, no matter how terrifying it may be. The Shadow recoiled, its voice fading into the distance, and the light around Ishmael flared brighter, flooding his being with a pure, untainted energy. It was as though the entire universe exhaled, and with that exhale came an answer, a response to Ishmael's declaration. For the first time, Ishmael felt at peace. The turmoil that had once gripped his soul began to melt away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of unity with everything around him. He was no longer alone, no longer an isolated individual battling his inner demons. He was one with the universe, one with the eternal flow of energy that connected all things. Yet, even in this state of peace, a deep question lingered. He had chosen the light, but what would come next? The light had shown him the truth of the cosmos, of his existence, but there was still the matter of the world beyond the veil, the world he had left behind. He knew now that he could not simply stay in the light. To do so would be to abandon the very mission that had led him here, to share the truth with those still lost in darkness. I see now, Ishmael whispered, his eyes wide with understanding. This is not just about me. It is about all of us. The light is meant to be shared, to reveal the truth, to awaken others. Leora's voice echoed in his mind, clear and firm. The journey is never about the self, Ishmael. It is about the whole. The light exists for all to see, not for one to hoard. The moment you understand this is the moment your journey truly begins. And in that moment, Ishmael knew his path was not over. It had only just begun. The choice to face the light, to embrace the truth, had opened the door to a new kind of mission, a mission to bring others out of the darkness, to lead them toward the same revelation he had found. The choice had been made. The light had revealed the truth. And now, it was time for him to step back into the world, carrying the burden of this knowledge with him, ready to share it with those who were still lost. He turned, ready to leave the luminous space behind, and with every step he took back toward the door, he felt the weight of his decisions settle within him. The shadows had been banished, the illusions shattered. There was no going back. Ishmael stepped through the doorway, his body returning to the world of the living, the world of matter. The glow of the light faded, but its presence lingered within him, as though the very core of his being had been reshaped by its energy. The world before him felt unfamiliar, not because it had changed, but because he had changed. The air was thick with the scent of the earth, familiar, comforting, yet distant, as though he were seeing it for the first time. The noises of the world reached him like a distant murmur, as though filtered through the veil of his newly awakened consciousness. The city that sprawled before him was alive, bustling with movement, with noise, with people, yet none of it seemed to matter in the same way it once had. It was all part of the grand design, part of the endless cycle of life and death, of creation and destruction. But there was something else now, a profound sense of urgency. The revelation he had received in the light was not meant to be hoarded. It was meant to be shared. The truth he had discovered had to be spread, not for his own salvation, but for the salvation of those still caught in the shadows of ignorance. As he made his way through the streets, Ishmael's mind raced with questions. How would he share this truth? How could he convey the depth of the revelation to those who had not seen what he had seen, who had not felt the weight of the light on their souls? He knew that words alone would never be enough. The truth was not something that could be easily explained. It had to be experienced, felt, lived. The city around him was a labyrinth of contradictions. On one corner, merchants hawked their wares, trinkets, food, goods, all designed to keep people distracted, to keep them from ever asking the deeper questions. On another, the poor huddled in the streets, their faces drawn with hunger and despair, trapped in a cycle of suffering that seemed endless. Above them, the rich lived in opulent homes, untouched by the struggles of the lower classes, their lives consumed by wealth and power. It was a world of extremes, beauty and pain, love and hatred, hope and despair. And yet, beneath it all, Ishmael could feel the pulse of the light, like a heartbeat beneath the surface of reality. It was there, waiting to be awakened, but only for those who were willing to look beyond the illusion of the material world. As he walked, he noticed something that stopped him in his tracks. A man stood by the side of the road, his face hidden beneath a hood, his eyes watching Ishmael with an intensity that made his skin crawl. The man's presence was both familiar and unsettling, as though he were part of the very fabric of the world, yet separate from it. "Ishmael," the man said, his voice low and gravelly, as though it came from the depths of the earth itself. "You have seen the light. You have walked the path, and now you know the truth." Ishmael's heart skipped a beat. He had not spoken aloud, had he? He had not mentioned the light to anyone, not since leaving the temple. And yet, this man knew. "How do you know my name?" Ishmael asked, his voice betraying the unease he felt. The man did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his gaze never leaving Ishmael's face. The air between them seemed to thrum with an energy, as though something ancient and powerful was stirring. "I have been waiting for you," the man said, his voice both soothing and unsettling. "You are not the first to walk this path, but you are the one who has chosen it. You have chosen the truth, and now, the truth must choose you." Ishmael's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? Who are you?" The man's lips curled into a smile, but it was not a smile of warmth or kindness. It was a smile of recognition, as though he knew something Ishmael did not. "I am but a shadow of the truth," the man replied. "A messenger, if you will. I am here to remind you of the cost of the path you have chosen. For the light does not come without a price. It is not enough to simply know the truth. You must live it, breathe it, become it. And once you do, there is no turning back." Ishmael took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to understand," the man said, his voice quiet, almost hypnotic, "that the world you have returned to is not the same one you left. It is not a world of peace and enlightenment. It is a world of darkness, a world in which the truth is hidden beneath layers of illusion and deception. And it is a world in which those who know the truth are hunted, persecuted, silenced." Ishmael felt a shiver run down his spine. The weight of the man's words settled into his chest like a stone. He had known, deep down, that returning to the world would not be easy. But this was more than he had anticipated. The truth he carried was dangerous. It could tear apart everything he knew, every relationship, every belief. "You must make a choice, Ishmael," the man continued. "You can return to the shadows, to the comfort of ignorance, and live in peace. Or you can embrace the truth fully and take on the mantle of the light. But know this, once you step into the light, there is no going back. You will become a beacon for others, a guide for those who are lost. But you will also become a target for those who wish to keep the truth hidden." Ishmael stood there, his mind racing. The world around him seemed to darken, the weight of the man's words pressing in on him. The decision before him was simple, yet monumental. To live in peace, to turn away from the light, would be to deny everything he had come to understand. But to embrace the light fully, to live it, would mean a life of constant struggle, of persecution, of isolation. But there was no choice, not really. He had seen the truth, and now he had to share it, no matter the cost. "I choose the light," Ishmael said, his voice firm, unwavering. The man nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Then you have made your decision, and with it, you have embraced your destiny." As the man turned and disappeared into the shadows, Ishmael knew that his journey was far from over. The road ahead would be fraught with danger, with challenges that would test every fiber of his being. But he was no longer afraid. He had seen the truth, and now he would live it no matter what. The streets were bustling with life as Ishmael made his way deeper into the city, the weight of his decision still settling heavily on his shoulders. The world seemed unchanged, yet everything felt different now. The people around him, absorbed in their daily lives, seemed oblivious to the profound shift that had occurred within him. They walked past him without a glance, consumed by their own struggles, desires, and distractions. Ishmael had thought that returning to the world would be a moment of clarity, that he would feel connected to everything once again. Instead, he felt like an outsider, a spectator to a drama he could no longer fully participate in. The truth he had embraced was isolating, a beacon that separated him from the world he had once known. As he walked, he became increasingly aware of the darkness that seemed to lurk at the edges of everything. It wasn't a literal darkness, but a pervasive sense of deceit, a distortion of reality that wrapped itself around the hearts and minds of the people. He could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, pulling at his soul. His gaze landed on a group of children playing in the streets, their laughter echoing in the air. For a moment, he wondered what it would be like to return to innocence, to live without the burden of knowledge. But he knew that was impossible now. The veil had been lifted, and the truth could never be unseen. A sharp voice broke through his reverie. "You there?" Ishmael turned to see a man approaching, his expression stern, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. The man's clothes were simple, yet there was something about him that seemed out of place, an aura of authority that radiated from him, a silent command that made Ishmael instinctively step back. "Who are you?" the man asked, his voice low, his eyes scanning Ishmael with a knowing intensity. "You don't belong here." Ishmael's heart skipped a beat. He had felt the man's presence before, lurking in the back of his mind, like a shadow watching him from the corner of his vision. He had sensed this energy before, the same energy that had filled the temple, that had guided him on his journey. The man before him was no ordinary person. "I am Ishmael," he said, his voice steady despite the unease that gripped him. "I've just returned to the city." The man's eyes flickered with recognition, but he did not respond immediately. Instead, he took a step closer, his gaze never leaving Ishmael's face. "You've seen the light, haven't you?" the man said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "You've walked the path and returned, but you're not the first. There have been others, you know. Those who sought the truth and found it, only to be consumed by it." Ishmael's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? Who are you?" The man's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no warmth in it. "I am someone who has been watching. Someone who knows what happens to those who embrace the truth fully. It's not a path that leads to peace, Ishmael. It leads to conflict, to pain, to betrayal. You've come back, but you've only scratched the surface of what lies ahead." Ishmael took a step back, his mind reeling. How could this man know so much? How could he know about his journey, his encounter with the light, when Ishmael had not spoken a word to anyone? "Who are you?" Ishmael repeated, his voice now edged with tension. "What do you want from me?" The man's eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, Ishmael felt as though he were looking into the abyss, a place where truth and lies blurred together in a dizzying spiral. The man's gaze was penetrating, as though he were seeing into the very depths of Ishmael's soul. "I am a messenger," the man said quietly, "a servant of the forces that govern this world. And I am here to warn you. The truth you seek is not the truth you think it is. It is a weapon, a tool to control, to bend the world to your will. The light you've seen is not the end of your journey, is only the beginning. And once you begin to walk the path, you can never turn back." Ishmael felt his throat tighten. He had never imagined that the truth could be used as a weapon. He had believed it was something pure, something that would bring peace and clarity to the world. But now, doubts began to creep into his mind. Was the truth truly as powerful as this man claimed? Could it be twisted, corrupted, manipulated? The man continued, his voice softer now, but no less insistent. "There are those who will seek to stop you, Ishmael. They will try to silence you, to erase the truth you carry. They will use fear, power, deception. But the greatest threat will come from within. You will be tempted, tested, pushed to your limits. And the question will always be the same. Will you hold on to the truth, no matter the cost? Ishmael swallowed hard. The weight of the man's words pressed down on him like a physical force. He had felt the pull of something greater within him, something that urged him to embrace the light fully, to share it with the world. But now, that sense of purpose felt fragile, like a thread in the wind. "What should I do?" Ishmael asked, his voice barely a whisper. The man's smile deepened, though it was still devoid of warmth. "You must decide for yourself, Ishmael. But remember this, the truth you carry is not yours to keep. It must be shared, spread, lived. But be careful, for there are forces that will stop at nothing to keep it hidden. And when they come for you, as they will, you must be ready to fight. For the truth, once awakened, cannot be undone." With that, the man turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Ishmael standing in the street, his mind racing with uncertainty. The world around him seemed to spin, the people walking past him unaware of the conversation that had just transpired. Ishmael was no longer sure of his place in this world. The path ahead was clouded, and the choices before him felt more daunting than ever before. But one thing was certain, his journey had only just begun, and the light that burned within him would guide him, no matter the darkness that sought to consume it. The night was thick with an unnatural silence, as if the very air held its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Ishmael stood at the edge of the city, the lights of the marketplace behind him like distant stars fading into the horizon. The darkened landscape before him stretched endlessly, the shadows seeming to stretch just a little too far, as though they were reaching for him. He had come so far, through trials, doubts, and the weight of revelations too heavy to bear. And now, here at the precipice, with everything at stake, he was faced with a final choice: to embrace the truth fully, knowing that it would change everything, or to walk away, to retreat into the familiar darkness that had once seemed so much easier. The city, once a place of comfort, now felt like a prison. The faces of its inhabitants blurred in his mind, all of them trapped in their illusions, living lives shaped by lies and distractions. He had seen beyond the veil, but now, the truth weighed down on him like 1,000 stones. "You can't go back," a voice echoed in his mind. The voice of the man he had encountered earlier, the one who had warned him about the dangers of knowing too much. "Once the truth is awakened, it cannot be undone. You will never find peace again. Are you ready to fight for it, Ishmael?" The question hung in the air, demanding an answer. Ishmael closed his eyes, drawing a deep breath. The path had never seemed so clear, and yet it had never seemed so treacherous. He remembered the faces of those he had met on his journey, those who had lived in ignorance, those who had clung to their own illusions, too afraid to face what he had seen. Could he bring them into the light, or would they turn away, rejecting the truth as they had done so many times before? His fingers brushed the pendant around his neck, the symbol of the truth he had carried with him all this time. It burned against his skin, a reminder of everything he had learned, everything he had become. It was no longer just an object. It was a part of him. He knew that to embrace the truth meant to accept the burden that came with it. There would be no rest, no return to innocence. The forces of darkness would never stop trying to twist the truth, to suppress it. And yet, he also knew that to walk away would be to abandon everything he had fought for, to allow the lies to continue their grip on the world. A rustling sound from behind him broke his thoughts. He turned swiftly, and standing there in the shadows was the figure of the man, the same one who had warned him before. His eyes glowed with a strange intensity, and his expression was almost pitying. "Ishmael," the man said softly, "you still don't understand, do you? The truth you're holding on to, it's not just yours to bear. It belongs to everyone, but they will never accept it. They will hate you for it, fear you. You will become a threat to everything they know, and in the end, it will destroy you." Ishmael's heart pounded. The words stung, but deep inside, he knew that the man was right. The truth was a weapon. It was dangerous. And yet, how could he deny it? How could he return to ignorance when the light had already shown him the way? "Then let it destroy me," Ishmael replied, his voice steady, though his hands trembled. Because I will not live a lie anymore. The truth is worth the cost. It always has been. The man stared at him for a long moment, a flicker of something akin to approval crossing his features. So be it, he said quietly. You have chosen. But remember, the world does not forgive those who dare to reveal its secrets. With a final, almost imperceptible nod, the man turned and melted back into the shadows, leaving Ishmael standing alone on the edge of the city, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. For the first time in his life, Ishmael was no longer unsure. He knew his purpose. The truth he carried within him was a gift, a burden that would lead him forward. He was not the first to walk this path, nor would he be the last. But he was the one who had chosen to face it head-on. The night around him seemed to shift, the darkness that had once seemed so all-encompassing now fading, if only slightly, as the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon. And in that moment, Ishmael understood. The truth, once seen, would never fade. It would live on in him, in every step, every choice, every breath he took from that moment forward. As he turned and began to walk toward the unknown, the world before him felt vast, filled with challenges and dangers, but also felt full of possibilities. The truth was his to carry, and he would carry it with the strength he had found within himself. No matter the cost,